Next up, we have James Schneider, the national organizer of Momentum, having previously worked himself as a journalist for the New African magazine and Think Africa. He has a unique on-the-ground experience of both being an activist and a journalist, and has played an instrumental role in successive Corbyn leadership campaigns that have, and I don't think this is an overstatement, changed the face of British politics. James.
Thank you very much. So I'm not going to talk about the world of pain that comes through this phone when I have to deal with the media attacks that we get against Momentum every day and also against the Corbyn campaign. Instead, I'm going to talk about something slightly more hopeful from my previous incarnation as Justin was saying, as an Africa journalist. The coverage both of the continent from the outside and also media coverage in the continent is terrible, and it's structurally flawed, and it's intensely biased, and it represents all of the worst power dynamics that exist across societies in a similar or analogous manner to it does here. However, I found that over the last 6 years, although not overcoming these fundamental structural issues, coverage has improved in a number of ways, and there are things that have done that, and there has been a kind of informal counter-hegemonic strategy that people have been employing that has worked. So I want to go through that and then see what elements of that could be applicable to what we're trying to do here, so that we can move things forward somewhat. There's misquoted Gandhi. I'll misquote Jello Biafra, the lead singer of the Dead Kennedys, who said, well, he didn't quite say, but we'll say he said, "Don't hate the media, be the media." Now, this isn't just be new media, although that's vital. This isn't just be active on social media, making sure people's voices get heard. This also means changing the institutions that currently exist, because, as Greg just said, there is no point whatsoever ignoring the largest communication organs that speak to the most people. We need to use a strategy that builds on all three of these things to build our own channels, to communicate our own messages, but also to change the institutions that are communicating for us. So, in my experience, there were three pillars which helped change things. So by change things, to say what things still are like, but were more like beforehand. You had the New York Times defending the fact that it uses white characters that its readers can see themselves in when trying to write news stories about different countries in Africa, which they would say this is the only way that we can tell this story is if we put a Western aid worker, for example, as being the main source that is quoted. That practice happens far less. The number of African journalists who are employed by international media organizations to write about their own countries has dramatically increased, and also those who do write who are not from the countries that they're writing about, have in general become more specialist and more embedded and more engaged with what they're doing, which means that the people that they're quoting, they're far more likely to be people who are directly affected by stories rather than what does the investor who owns shares in Randgold think about what's going on in a civil war in Mali, but perhaps what people in Mali think about it. So the first element is new media that is credible, that sits alongside existing media. I worked for one which was called Think Africa Press, which sadly no longer exists, which was a Nigerian-owned news analysis and essays website. And what we tried to do was help develop an empowered and critical constituency that could go and challenge media narratives elsewhere and change the way that things were covered. So developing specialists, making sure that we're employing journalists who were specialist in what they are doing, wanted to develop that, but also getting experts. So, I mean, we know that across every field there is a huge amount of excellent expertise which is locked up behind the paywall in JSTOR and behind incomprehensible language for most people, and behind terminology, which needs to be taken out. So credible new media that challenged especially Western narratives. The second, really importantly, was the growth of especially Twitter, number of African Twitter users. So someone writes a crappy story, you tell them it's a crappy story. You tell them why it's a crappy story. You tell their editor it's a crappy story. You tell them all, here are the places in which you should have spoken to this sort of person, that sort of person. This is where your story is flawed, and it has had really, notable, significant, of course not complete, effect, and that increases accountability for journalists. And then the third one is about technological shifts which have changed somewhat the balance of power in domestic media. So, to give an example of Nigerian media, and comparing coverage in the Nigerian press between the 2011 elections and the 2015 elections. 2011 elections, the media is entirely dominated by 3 broadcasters and by a fantastically corrupt printed media. 2015, there are 3.5 broadcasters, and it's still mainly dominated by a fantastically corrupt print media, but there are also alternatives that emerge that are able to hold people to account. For example, one was Premium Times, an online newspaper, which was raided and shut down on the eve of the elections by the security services, but they got a tip-off and they were able to scatter. And they were able to work with others, including my publication and election observers, to ensure that results that they were getting from across the country got out to people through social media, through other channels, before anybody could play around with them, and helped to safeguard those election results, which did see a transfer of power. So how do we do... So the key thing, I think, in all those 3 things which links them together and helps change traditional media, is this developing of an empowered critical constituency that has to be taken seriously by, let's say, the more liberal end of the forces within the traditional media, which is, generally speaking, structurally opposed to majority interests. And so, how can we do the same thing here? How can we link the same 3 things together? So, first thing, projects like yours with new media, that has to be high quality, it has to be rigorous, it has to be innovative. What we can't do is have just a cacophony of polemic which can be ignored. We need to be holding ourselves to a higher standards of rigor and a higher standards of credibility than the normal newspapers are covering. And if we fail in those, it's very, very easy for us to be ignored. The second thing, which we are far more able to do now, is produce our own material and get people to write about it, less mediated, at times unmediated. Produce our own videos about what we're doing, produce our own news reports, but of sufficiently high quality that they can be picked up by your traditional broadcasters, by the websites of big media houses, so that they can play them and they can amplify the message. And these 2 things help build, I think, this critical constituency and empower our users on social media, because political Twitter in the UK it's horrible. It's really not a good space, which damages our ability to hold journalists to account and to hold editors to account, because the tone is so aggressive and unpleasant that kind of robust critical challenge that we need to be able to have to hold people to account, to amplify the voices of our movements, can be ignored. But I think the developing of our own channels and the developing of new media channels can help to give, as Greg was saying, the best information and the best lines to our people to put those forward to power. And that will help us be listened to and make more of those newsroom conversations say, oh, I did read this thing that said, oh, the thing we did was a little bit off, maybe we should think about that just a little bit. And that just a little bit is a chink, and it's a useful chink, and we start moving on and we build from there. So what I'm suggesting is the battleship turning around is a fantastic analogy, I think, for what we're trying to do in changing the way that we are communicated with and that we communicate with each other. It's a very, very long march through the existing institutions and building our own institutions. But right now, we can work really hard and begin to shift the balance of power just a little bit, give us some more space, some more voices. It's never going to be perfect, but we can make ourselves heard far more effectively than we are now.
Thanks very much. And on that subject, I should just say this is an ongoing discussion, and we really do welcome and ideas from everyone here and beyond. This is a kind of litmus test, if you like, for a series of events that are going to take place throughout the autumn, partly in conjunction with our partners at Real Media. You would have received flyers when you came in about a national tour that's taking place that culminates at Goldsmiths on the 10th of December in our second Media Democracy Festival. There's also a website specifically around that campaign, reclaimthemedia.org.uk. So please do get involved.